Sure.
Good. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Call the meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Mayor White,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez.
Here.
Councilmember Martinez. Councilmember Ortiz. Councilmember Tipton,
Present.
Chair Garcia. Vice Chair Zavala,
Here.
Commissioner Urquidez,
Here.
Commissioner Gallardo,
Here.
and Commissioner Vasquez.
Here.
And here comes Stephanie.
Coming in. Wait. Will you all please stand for the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Agenda review. No changes. Public comments from the audience regarding items not on the agenda. There's no audience, so we can skip over that. Biennial ethics training.
All right. Mary's going to start us off, but we are here tonight to do your biennial ethics training. It's required every 2 years and it's required to last 2 hours. So now you know how long we'll be here. And it has required topics that we'll go through, but you see them on the screen here: ethics, conflicts, public service. We'll do a little Brown Act, but because you recently did that training, we'll kind of keep that part short. But with that,
Okay, yeah, I'll take the lead here. So good evening, everyone. I see many familiar faces from the last training and just for meetings in general. And you guys, I think most people know who I am. I'm Mary Lerner. I'm the assistant city attorney here with Jennifer and have done years of work for Greenfield and am here primarily for water meetings now and training. So nice to see everyone. As we get started, we're going to go over a number of in-depth ethics-related, conflict-related laws. And I don't want you to worry like you need to know all these in depth because it's going to be a lot of information, but maybe just enough to say, hey, I remember Mary and Jennifer talking about that. And maybe I should inquire, if I'm going to take this ticket to the Salinas Rodeo, talk to me. Maybe I should inquire as to whether or not that's a gift or the value or reporting requirements. Everyone here has filled out a form 700, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so, and Jen and I are required to fill those out as well upon taking office, upon leaving office, and then annually with everyone. And that's where we report all, any gifts we have, any interests that would maybe be related to city business. And so we'll get started with each of those. And forgive me, I don't have a clicker. Okay, so required training. The topics are biennial ethics training, doing the right thing in the public interest, spotting issues before they become a problem, and then keeping out of the headlines in a bad way. And so we're going to actually go through a number of actual headlines. And what we don't want to see are those headlines here in Greenfield. So we're going to talk about personal financial gain, personal advantages and perks, government transparency and fair process, general ethics, principles beyond the law. So we're going to talk about whistleblowing as well. So let's start with public corruption. How would you guys define corruption?
Wrongdoing.
Okay. Just a wrongdoing. Anything else?
Using your office for personal gain.
Okay. Okay, any other ideas?
Money under the table for getting their vote on something.
Yeah.
Bribes. Yeah.
Bribes. Yeah. All of the above. So the definition is dishonest or illegal behavior, especially by powerful people. So government officials, our commissioners, our electeds, police officers, and inducement to wrong by improper and unlawful means. So example, bribery. So these statistics, United States Common Sense back in a report almost 10 years ago had on average about 1,000 public officials nationwide convicted of corruption every year. That's a significant number of headlines. That number is not changing. So in fiscal year 2021, the government reported in the first 6 months, almost 300 prosecutions. And these prosecutions, they'll take about a year to a year and a half. And so I used to be a litigator, and I like to think that people's time has value and your peace of mind has value. So I'm sure each of you would rather be anywhere else but in court being prosecuted. I mean, I could think of a million other places I would rather be, and you don't sleep. You also, we're going to talk about instances where you maybe forever lose your ability to even run for office ever again in your lifetime. Some of the prosecutions included bribery, graft, which is unscrupulous use of a politician's authority for personal gain, conflicts of interest. First place in these new numbers for fiscal year 2021 is the Eastern District of Louisiana, New Orleans. Second place was District of Columbia, and third place was right here in California, down in the LA area. We can get you do you want to? Yeah.
So out of curiosity, it's 1,000 public officials. How many public officials actually are there?
That's a good question. So I don't have a total of like when we're talking state, federal, local, thousands of people.
Probably close to millions.
Yeah, it could be. I think it could be up there. I think you're right, Councilmember Tipton. I think the goal here, though, is we don't want those headlines locally for us.
Absolutely.
Right. But I think maybe you have a good point. In the grand scheme of, we're probably looking at a small fraction. But when you look at 70 California corruption cases just in California, that seems significant.
But again, look at the number of public officials we have. And considering we're sitting in a county that has 19 school districts in it.
So I think there is some hope in that we have primarily good actors instead of bad actors. Yeah. And I'd like to think this training is a part of helping with those numbers and leading to the good actors and not the bad actors. Fair points there. So bribery and monetary misconduct is the most common. It's an average of 1.99 years between crime and indictment. The crime lasted on average about 3 years before they were indicted. Police corruption was involved in 21% of the cases, and we're looking at corruption in California. 29% involved highly ranked officials, including mayors, and return to public office. We had 9 return, 53 did not return, and then we had 8 unknowns. And over in the Central Valley, there was a significant case years ago. It was called Operation Rezone. Did anyone hear about Operation Rezone? So Clovis, and that's where my office is based out of Fresno, which is near Clovis. So we had a developer influenced public officials to secure approval of housing tracts. The developer was charged along with 2 former council members. It was a decades-long practice of developers subverting local zoning laws by buying off council members. Shocked to see this happen in that community. It ended with guilty pleas and jail time, financial ruin, city embarrassment. The city had to undo their actions. So imagine the staff time. Imagine that you're a council and you've put all you have into deciding these and a planning commission, and now everything has to be undone. The headlines: Clovis City Council reverses votes on Fortune's projects, move returns parcels to their previous allowed use. These are some additional headlines. FBI inquiry continues to unearth corruption. Former mayor says he's done nothing wrong. Clovis City Council member has been target of FBI investigation. Freeze proposed on Clovis projects tied to FBI inquiry. Clovis council member named in corruption inquiry. Lobbyist admits helping Clovis leader extort funds. And this is from one of probably the most conservative communities in the state of California. I mean, Yeah. So when this happened, it was shocking. I think if it happens anywhere, it's shocking. But the fact that people were being paid off for their votes. Another example is Beaumont, California, Inland Empire. And so these were some headlines that we saw. Arraignments delayed for 3 Beaumont corruption cases, 6 jailed in $43 million Beaumont public corruption case. All 7 former Beaumont officials plead not guilty in corruption case. Momentum for Inland Empire corruption cases still strong. Beaumont, assets may be frozen or seized. So if your city assets are frozen or seized, we're going to have a problem doing business here in the city. So with this case, for 6 years, the FBI and the district attorney investigated local public agencies in Riverside and San Bernardino counties. The city of Beaumont, this is who was involved: the former city manager, the police chief, public works director, the city attorney, not our firm, by the way. I just want to throw that out there. Economic development director, finance director, and city planner were all indicted for embezzlement and misappropriation of public funds. And the vehicles of corruption included bond refinancing, no interest loans, and misappropriation of transportation development impact fees.
How many of them were found guilty?
I think it said, oh, they all pled not guilty. I don't know. I'll find out for you though. But we don't want the headlines, right?
No.
We don't. These are awful headlines. Not to mention, the state can come in and do an audit and the city's going to pay for it. The city's going to pay for all that time. And so we can all think of other ways to use public funds than having to clean up these messes by our public officials, both elected and appointed. So what do you do if a red flag is raised? Because a lot of times Jennifer and I will get questions like, well, I think I might have a conflict, but I'm not sure. Can I take this gift? Can I host a coffee day and have the city pay for it? And me meet with developers? We get all kinds of questions. So really when there's a red, we'd rather you ask the questions instead of later on say, oh, by the way, I did X. What do you think? So stop and confer. Talk to our office. There's online resources. There's the FPPC, which is the Fair Political Practices Commission. And I want to stress that if you end up in litigation before the court, you can't say, well, I mean, you can try to say it. Well, the city attorney told me, or I know a judge friend and he told me. The only thing you're going to be able to rely on is a written opinion from the FPPC. It's not even going to be enough to say, well, I called the FPPC and this is who I spoke to and this is who they said. So we always encourage council members and commissioners to get a written opinion from the FPPC, because then you have it to rely on and that will be your only defense if someone attempts to prosecute you. So there's hundreds of constantly changing rules and laws that apply. And that's why when we go over these tonight, January 1, some of them could change. The following year, some of them could change. And so we'll keep doing this ethics training biannually, but just be aware, ask the questions. So personal financial gain, bribery. Public officials may not solicit, receive, or agree to receive a benefit in exchange for their official actions. So if you're meeting with the developer and the developer says, hey, you know what, I could give you these upgraded house perks over here if you vote in favor of my development. Like I have these cabinets sitting over here that no one's going to use. So I'll go ahead and put them in your house because I know this vote is coming up. Is that okay? No, don't take anything extra. And these are examples that have actually happened. You have a developer that says, oh, hey, you're going to buy a house in this development that I'm doing. I do have these cabinets over. They're going to go to waste. They're going to go to waste. They're worth $2,000. I'll go ahead and put them in yours. I also have this tile over here. I'm going to go ahead and put that in your house for you too. The best answer is no, or I will pay what anyone else would have paid for them. I don't want to be treated any differently. So what are some possible consequences for accepting a bribe?
Office
Okay. For how long?
permanently ever.
Yeah. You're disqualified from holding office forever. What else?
Jail time.
Jail time. It's a felony. Yes. Criminal prosecution. Fines. I heard fines. attorney's fees. And if you're accused of this, the city is not going to cover your attorney's fees. In addition, if you're found guilty, there's a chance you're going to have to pay the other side's attorney's fees. And so that's not cheap. That's a significant amount of money. And I've had some people, when I teach business law, and I've had students say, well, they could get a judgment against me. I don't have anything they could collect on. Well, here in California, judgments are renewable every 10 years. So you may not have something now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you might. And that's what I tell them. It's renewable. So be aware. People will renew their judgments against you. It will stand out there. So spot on. Case study, South El Monte mayor pleads guilty to bribery. Some more headlines. South El Monte mayor resigns. State audit underway as ex-South El Monte mayor pleads guilty to bribery. So here we have the mayor pleading guilty to accepting $45,000 in bribes from a city contractor in exchange for approval of city contracts. Faced up to 10 years in federal prison. I imagine there were multiple charges against him. And then the pending comprehensive state audit of city records at city expense. So what we have, and we have the California Political Reform Act, and it's really administered by the FPPC. And this passed back in 1974 after the aftermath of the Watergate scandal. And so what the community wanted, what we all wanted, was greater public scrutiny with respect to our public officials. We wanted to know what was going on. We wanted transparency. And so now we have the California Political Reform Act, and it states public officials, whether elected or appointed, should perform their duties in an impartial manner, free from bias caused by their own financial interests or the financial interests of persons who have supported them. And when we talk about your own financial interests, we're also talking about family members. So when we get to gifts, one thing we're going to talk about is I could give Councilmember Ticton, I'm a developer, and I say, hey, I'm going to send you to Hawaii. You're like, no, can't accept that trip to Hawaii. Well, I'll give it to your wife. I'll give that trip to your wife. No. Well, I'll give it to your grandmother. No, you can't even have a pass through for the gift.
So I'm wondering there about shall versus should. Because it uses should in this. Should is not a definitive, shall is.
Right. And that's a quote from the Political Reform Act. I think the should is that you should or else. Not you shall, but I get what you're saying. And therein lies the trouble with laws that are made, right? Yeah. You'd be surprised how many times in litigation we fight over an and or a comma. It happens frequently. You worked in a law office, didn't you? Yeah. So you know what I'm talking about. Those commas, those ands, those ors.
Well, that's why you go out and do shall.
It's important. It's
doing
important.
contract negotiations. Some of those have come out. Like, wait a minute, why is this?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Let's get to that.
Yeah. So the general rule, you may not make, participate in making, or use official position to influence a governmental decision if the decision could have reasonably foreseeable material financial effect on the official, immediate family, or any financial interest. So we're going to dive deeper into this as we go along. I've had some cities, we're going to talk about the 500-foot rule with our property, and you shouldn't make decisions that would necessarily increase or decrease your property value. It actually goes both ways, that law. I've had some cities have a large map and draw a 500-foot radius around each commissioner's and council member's property.
That's what they do.
Yeah. And so then we can point it out to you, right? We can issue spot with you like, hey, this item's coming before the planning commission, and look where your house is, and look where this development is, or look where these speed humps are that are proposed, or whatever it is, the liquor license that we're going to give. I think when we were doing the Brown Act training, I shared the liquor store and the council member conundrum that, it was right across the street from him and the liquor license was being given. And so he had to recuse himself, but leave the room. So we'll also do some more reminders about that. Also, there's going to be an exception to this. So the general rule, there's no conflict where the financial effect is indistinguishable from the public generally. Examples, utility rates applied equally, citywide fees, limited neighborhood effects like traffic controls, nuisance regulations, and then anything related to all renters. So what we're looking for in this materiality standard is financial interest in your business entities, your sources of income. We're looking at gifts. We're looking at your or your immediate family's personal finances, and then real property as well. So Fair Political Practices Commission administers and enforces the Political Reform Act. We did read a paragraph from that with the should instead of the shall. Consultants are available to provide telephone or written advice. Only written advice can be relied on in civil or criminal prosecution, and that's only written advice from the FPPC. So now we're going to take a deeper dive into each of these types of economic interests. So business entities, there's a new catch-all test. Even if the business entity is not the subject of a governmental decision, the effect is material if a prudent person with sufficient information would find it reasonably foreseeable that the decision's financial effect would contribute to a change in the value of the business entity or stock. So who's that prudent person? Okay. The public, maybe the jury if you end up in court, and then reasonably foreseeable. So what we're looking for is how would someone in a like position, how would they view this? How would they handle this? How would a prudent person handle this situation? And that's what you're going to be judged against. And to me, that sounds subjective.
Pretty vague.
Very vague. I mean, that's a lot of legal words in there, and we don't know who they're judging us against, right? That prudent person. And so
Intentionally vague.
it is. It is intentionally vague. And I think it allows for great arguments by your attorney when they're in court. So source of income. So we're going to look to income from the sale of goods and services, including a salary, income from the sale of personal or real property. The nexus test is the official receives or is promised the income to achieve a goal or purpose, which would be achieved, defeated, aided, or hindered by the decision. So what that is saying is that you're going to get this income to achieve this certain outcome. And that's what we want to avoid. So this 500-foot presumption, and I have a great case study for us. So this 500-foot presumption for residential property, it's not a suggestion. It's actually a presumption that we measure. There is a catch-all rule again, that reasonable person would believe that it is reasonably foreseeable the decision would influence the market value of the official's property. And so I always ask people, who's that reasonable person? Because my kids in their 20s would say, I am not that reasonable person. Like, yeah, in high school, I was definitely not that person. But it goes back to how would a person in a similar situation have responded? Like a rational, reasonable person. So here's the example, and I love this one. So Port Hueneme councilman fined by the state commission. So here, this councilman was fined $3,000 because he did not recuse himself from voting, which allowed for $370,000 and $762,000 in upgrades for Hueneme Beach Park and Miranda Park. And his house was within 500 feet of both parks. And so the councilman tried to argue that the improvements were minimal and that the 500-foot rule had become more of a guideline in recent years. So I don't think you'll have success with a guideline argument if you end up in court. And then we have special rules for contracts. So if I own a copy business and I'm elected to council, and I know council is going to go out for an equipment contract for copiers, I can't say, choose me. I can't bid on it. I can't say this is the contract this council should go with. Unless I happen to be the only copy company in the entire world. Like, it's me. That's it. I'm unique. I'm special. I have the only product for this council. That's going to be our limited exception. And it's this rule of necessity that we have. So if you have a landscaping business and we're going to go out in our LLMDs and PFMDs and take care of landscaping, you can't bid on that and have the city accept your contract for the services. And you guys can stop me with questions anytime. I know this is riveting information. Okay. So exciting. So the travel store. An elected official in a travel agency business voted on consent calendar to approve payments to her travel agency. She failed to disclose it on her Form 700, and her possible fine was $76,000. Her ultimate fine ended up being up pretty close to the amount of the approved payments. So I just want to read this article. I know it's small print. An Alameda County Board of Education trustee has agreed to pay $29,000 for making decisions as an elected official that had a reasonably foreseeable financial benefit to her travel agency. A Fair Political Practices Commission also fined Eileen McDonald for 2 counts of failing to disclose her economic interests. From October 2000 through November 2002, McDonald received 15 checks totaling $28,481 from the Newark School District to her agency. The agency made travel plans for district employees and students, an FPPC report said. So I can tell you the rule of necessity, it would in no way apply here. There's travel agents all over. Someone else could have made those travel arrangements for the school district. So just an example of a headline from some time ago. So these don't go away, and people will remember. People have long memories when it comes to our elected and our appointeds. So harsh penalties and remedies. Contract is void and unenforceable. There's criminal, civil, and administrative sanctions. And after conviction, the public official is forever banned from holding any office. So this travel agent, because of what she did, she is forever banned from running for office again. Okay. Personal advantages and perks. So there's 2 kinds of perks. There's perks that others offer you, which is gifts, or there's perks that you give yourself. So use of public resources. As we enter the holiday season, I think these gifts kind of become more prevalent, especially, you know, if you have consultants that work for the city, they may bring in a gift basket. Or bottles of wine, or the cannabis companies might be bringing something into the city as a thank you. And so we're going to talk about some of those examples. Catch up here. Okay, Colima official accused of illegally accepting gifts. A city council member running for re-election was indicted for allegedly accepting gifts from a card room owner, then voting on matters that benefited the business. Councilmember Philip Lum Jr., 53, is charged with conspiracy and mail fraud. Lum allegedly took multiple vacations to the Philippines paid for by the Lucky Chances Casino, failed to report those trips as required by law, and voted on issues affecting the card room, according to the federal indictment unsealed Tuesday. And so, I mean, trips are nice, but we need to be paying for them ourselves. The gift limit. This gift limit, if you've been doing this training for a while, you'll probably notice this gift limit is slowly increasing. It does increase every odd year. So the current limit is $590. It's effective from January 1 of this year that we're currently in through December 31 of this next year. And state and local officials and employees are prohibited from receiving a gift or gifts totaling more than $590 in a calendar year from certain sources. For state and local officials and employees who file the Statement of Economic Interest, which is your Form 700s, under an agency's conflict of interest code, the gift limit is applicable only to individuals and entities that would have to be disclosed on the Form 700. So applicable to everyone in this room. And then again, that gift limit is adjusted for inflation every odd numbered year. Gifts from others to officials. So gifts don't always have bows. They can be meals, tickets to events, travel expenses, rodeo tickets. I think that question came up years ago here. Elected officials, executive head of public agencies, as well as those with significant decision-making authority must be aware of gifts from all sources. For all others, be aware of gifts from sources that do business with the city. So this is that limit here, and this 500 should be 590. Gift filers report $50 and up. And I will always remember an example. And I think it was Anne who gave it to me years ago when she said she was at a city clerk's conference and she won a gift card for $49.99. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. So why was the gift card at the clerk's conference $49.99?
That's the end of the limit.
Yeah. So then Anne didn't have to report her winning of the gift card. And so even at conferences, we're aware of this. When we go to Cal Cities, you'll see like a non-Form 700 dinner. That means you're going to go to that dinner with that group of people, but you're going to pay for yourself. And so that's actually what they title the dinner, right? And so it's just keep that in the back of your mind, that $49.99. You know, sometimes I'll donate out of my own pocket to something, and I'll like to maybe a city manager's kids something. It'll be $49.99. Like I'll literally pull out $49.99. So we're aware of that $50 limit per calendar year. Gift filers, again, that $590.
So why doesn't the $50 go up?
You know, I don't know. And I wonder if in the future they're going to adjust that for inflation as well. Because $50 is a lot different today than it was.
Even 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So, for instance, you're volunteering and I volunteer for a lot of places to be tickets
Mhm.
for volunteering. How would that?
So the answer is it depends. So there are different nonprofit rules associated with these as well. And so if you're volunteering and you're working there, I don't necessarily see an issue, but your best course of action is just to email the FPPC and get a written opinion from them, because it will depend. It'll depend on their nonprofit status. If they're active, we have the Registry of Charitable Trust, so they can't even be out there actively trying to get money if they're not valid on the Registry of Charitable Trust. So there's a number of factors that go into it.
So I do like for the same the AT&T, so you brought very many tickets.
Because you're working there.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, because you're working there. And I think that that's probably the distinction. You're there working, whereas opposed to here's rodeo tickets and box seats, and you're not doing anything there. And so that will be part of the analysis.
So we get tickets for the fair, when they drop off tickets here.
Well, that's a good question. Are you guys doing something for the city there? I mean, there's a whole analysis that goes into it, right? I don't know if you're standing at a city booth telling people about the city. I don't know if you're there with PD, if they have a booth out and you're working with the PD. So it's just a number of factors that go into that, but we want to look at that.
And they may be worth less than $50. The fair entrance tickets. I don't know, but
Unless they're giving them to your entire family.
Yeah.
To go.
I think it was like 4, like parking and.
Yeah, so you'll want to look at the value of that.
I have a question on this $50. So is it cumulative? Or is it per? I mean, what if one person gives you 49 and another gives you 49?
Each person can give you 49.
Right.
Each,
But if one person gives you an additional 20, then you're.
yes. We can't do $49.99 on Monday and then Wednesday give you another $49.99.
But I can get $49.99 from 10 different people.
Yes, yes. And it's very similar to our campaign contribution matters. I mean, that's a whole other issue. But like when you have one community has a $200 limit and we had a developer give 200 to the wife, 200 to the husband, 200 to the son, 200 to the daughter, and that's where issues can be created. So good question. So which one are we on here?
Not that anybody gives me anything, just.
Okay, so the honoraria ban. So payments for speaking, writing, or attending events, you cannot accept payment for that. You can accept payment for the travel there, at least one day before, and for travel home, no more than one day after, but you can't accept payment for actually speaking at the event. So that needs to be on your dime unless the city has some sort of policy where they help cover that. The consequences and penalties are up to $5,000 per violation.
So at the event that you're going to speak at, can they pay for your overnight stay, or is that?
Yes, they can. So that day before and the day after. Yes, they can. Gifts from others to the city. So let's say we have developers, we have consultants bringing in gift baskets at Christmas time. So, or tickets to things. Like here, we have tickets to the Nutcracker for whoever you decide. It has to be used for official city business, and the city manager gets to control who uses the gift. You cannot designate, oh, these are for Councilmember Tipton. Oh, these are for Stephanie. It has to be the city manager gets to decide. Our recommendation is that like when they get a gift basket, put it in the lunchroom and let everybody take from it. I had one community where one city manager got a number of Starbucks gift cards and she didn't even want to mess with them. She just said, no, we can't accept these. I'm not going to accept these. Because if she put those in the break room, who knows? I mean, one person could walk in, grab all 50. She didn't even want to deal with that. It raised some red flags for her. So she returned them.
Mary,
Yes.
would it be okay if we, like, let's say they gave us 20 gift cards and we did like a drawing?
Yeah. So we're going to get to drawings.
Okay.
Yeah. And what it means to be like a pass through, an intermediary, right? Yeah. So you can, but there's going to be a form that needs to be reported to the FPPC. So, and in this instance here, the city manager or the city will need to complete Form 801. And that just is saying our city received this gift and file it with the FPPC.
Is that the same as raffle? What Ann was saying?
Yeah, that's what we were. Yeah, I think like at the holidays, I know the city has a lunch and they do a raffle. And I don't know if the city is using some of their own city funds, which is different than if a developer donates 10 gift baskets for drawings. There's just different rules that apply depending on the source. Gifts from city to officials. So considered reportable gifts to the official unless food, beverage of nominal value or a lawful expenditure of public funds. So when we have food for council members back there, I mean, we're not doing steak and lobster dinner every other Tuesday night. It's, it's
Not hardly.
that is what they serve back there is considered nominal value, right? Some drinks, some grapes, some cheese. Nominal value for the planning commission.
Just for close session.
So the gift rules apply to city raffles unless an employee donates the gift or the gift is paid for by the city except tickets. These rules are pretty technical, so I'll email you the actual law on this. And then gift exchanges are okay as long as they're gifts of similar value. So I can't, in hopes of keeping my job here at the city, gift the mayor a Porsche and he gives me a bottle of wine. Completely disproportionate in value, right? This is true. This is true. Let me- a can of Coors Light. There we go.
It's Porsche.
Oh, Portia. Okay, I can't even say it right. Thank you for that. Tickets and passes. So gift rules apply to event tickets and passes, even if provided to the city and passed through to the official. Includes admission to events the city operates. So within 45 days of distribution, the city must complete and post the FPPC Form 802. So we'll make sure the city knows that that's what they need to be doing is posting for the tickets. Gifts from family and friends. So gifts from spouses, children, parents, grandparents, grandchildren, siblings, in-laws, aunts, uncles. This also includes great aunts, great uncles, nieces, nephews, first cousins. Those aren't gifts under the FPPC rules unless they're an intermediary for someone else. So like here, Drew, I'm giving you this trip to Hawaii, but they actually received it from a developer consultant. Gifts among friends exchanged at holidays, birthdays, or similar occasions, if that's okay, as long as they're not substantially disproportionate in value, like we talked about with the Porsche. Wedding gifts must be reported at 50% value. So if I went to any of your weddings and I brought a gift and it was worth $200, you have to report it at least at $100 value.
Even if it was personal?
Yes. To an elected official. Is that what you're asking? Or like you just go to the wedding of a relative?
Yeah, just,
Oh, yeah, no, then you're fine. We're talking about if you invited me to your wedding, Jennifer to your wedding, any colleague here to your wedding, developers to your wedding.
oh,
And you receive gifts.
Yes, and you receive gifts from them. The exception is for bereavement offerings, acts of neighborliness, dating relationships, and acts of human compassion. So I know sometimes there'll be times when our firm will send flowers if someone's passed away in a city that we work in, you know, a colleague that we've worked with. And so that would be an exception.
question.
Okay.
When you talk about technical bereavement, what if, someone here loses a loved one?
Mhm.
And the developer comes along and says, you know, I know you're going through the hardships, I know your finances battle, blah, 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 blah. We're going to help you out.
That would raise some red flags for me. Significant red flags. Because it sounds like while they're trying to be kind, it could give the perception that they're trying to buy your vote. So that would raise significant red flags for me. And I would recommend before you take that gift or consider taking it, that you get that written opinion from the FPPC. That one, I bet the FPPC would come back and say, absolutely not. Good questions. Okay, travel payments. So you can accept travel payments from others to the city, but the payments have to be made directly to or coordinated with the city. It has to be for official city business as defined, but confer no personal benefit and must be consistent with the city's travel reimbursement policy. So if they're reimbursing you $500 for your meals on one day, and that's inconsistent with the travel policy for the city, you're going to have to say, no, I can only accept whatever the amount is. It's probably the IRS rate is what I'm guessing. A payment for travel reasonably related to a governmental purpose is reportable, but not subject to the gift limitation or honoraria ban under two circumstances. It's in connection with a speech given by the official, limited to the days immediately preceding and immediately following, and travel within the United States. So that was the other piece we hadn't talked about yet. They can't pay for you to travel to France and give a speech. Or the payment is by a government agency. Probably the way this is written. I don't know if that's a good use of your public funds, or even a misuse of public funds.
But I was thinking something like the United Nations gave you money to go give a speech somewhere else.
Yeah, I would imagine that would be okay. If it were the other government agency, but we'd look at the current state of the law. And I mean, if that happens, good for you. Yeah. Use of city resources. So we get this question a lot, especially in an election year for incumbents. So personal use of public resources is prohibited, including staff time and agency equipment. Political use of public resources is also prohibited, includes support or opposition of candidates or local ballot measures. So let's talk about this for a minute. The personal use. What we want to try to avoid is an incumbent's advantage. So, and Mayor, I'm going to use you as an example. You have an office here in the city and you're running for re-election and you're like, hey, Ann, can you print up 100 of my flyers for me for re-election to run out there and hand them out? Can't do it. That's going to get them in trouble. Can you run these through the postage machine real quick for me? I want to mail them out to a couple of businesses for my re-election campaign. Can't use it. Shouldn't even use it like to stamp your Christmas cards. But where we see it questioned most often is during election season. For political use. So if you have a measure that's going to be on the ballot and you're in favor of that measure, you can't say, hey, city, can you post this blurb about why everyone should vote for this measure and send it out. Now we draw a distinction there. The city can give out information related to the measure. So we can tell you it's going to be a 1%, and I'm just using examples. It's going to be a 1% sales tax used for public safety, requires 2/3 vote. When we're using it for public safety, we will be purchasing equipment. It will help increase the number of officers and firemen that we have here. Those are facts, and the city can share those facts all day long. What you can't do is use city resources to say, you should vote for this. You should vote for this because I'm in favor of it. What we want to do is just share the facts, be neutral. And I'm going to go off track a little bit here. So since we're in an election year, if you're out there campaigning for whatever, the city has a measure and you're out there as a resident, because remember, you hold two hats here. You hold your resident hat and you hold your commissioner or council hat. So you can do things as a resident. You can be out there knocking on doors saying, hey, I'm in favor of this. And here's why. And here's why I think it's a good idea. That's different than the night before everyone votes. The mayor wearing a shirt that says, I'm the mayor. I got my city shirt on and I'm pounding on the door. Hey, I think you should vote for this. It's a time, place, and manner test is what it is come election time. So just a little side note to think about since we're talking about election year and the use of city resources, some things to keep on your radar.
Question.
Yes.
Okay, so the mayor can't do that and do anything for him that would be beneficial for his election.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. That's a city resource and would be a city resource.
Funds that the mayor's printer breaks down. When he come in and use city printers, print out stuff for himself.
Okay, so no, that would raise red flags for me because we don't let anyone else come in and do it. The person running against him wouldn't be able to come in and do that. We'd look at him like they were crazy. He could go to FedEx and print
No, I
there.
understand that. I
Yeah.
knew the answer. I just want to clarify.
Yeah, and you're asking great questions because those are the things, right? Like we know the mayor, he's in here all the time and he comes in, he's like, man, my printer broke and I got to get this out, It's election season. And I think the inclination, especially when we're elected and we walk in and we ask staff to do something for them, what's their inclination going to be? Yeah. And that's not just use of city resources. That's in general. When a council member or a mayor or a commissioner walks in and says, hey, I need you to go look at X, and you start directing staff, that's a problem because staff most of the time is just going to do it because they want to, in their minds, they want to keep their job, right? Well, really the direction should be coming from the city manager or the department head. So council has two employees, the city manager and the city attorney. That's it. And that's who you hold accountable for if things aren't getting done.
Okay, so if our mayor goes to the city manager and says, I need to use the printers. And the city manager says, yeah, go ahead, Bob. Is there a conflict there?
Yes, Bob will probably get in trouble for that.
Not the city manager.
Well, that's a different conversation. That's probably the city manager's 5 employers holding him accountable in a different way. So the city manager and the city attorney have 5 people that employ them. And we're accountable to all 5, but we take direction from the majority.
Well, see, and honestly, if Paul came to, he went into Paul and said, hey, do this, and Paul didn't say no, I think the rest of us would yell, Paul.
Yeah. Like, what did you do? But it would be done in a closed session, city manager evaluation.
But that's just for election purposes, right?
No,
Citizens.
that's for any
Anything,
purpose.
huh?
Yeah,
He
he
wouldn't
can
have
come
any-
in and mail us Christmas cards on the city
No,
dime.
I'm not talking about that, but if it's city business, he could come in and take care of
If
it.
it's city business.
Okay.
Mhm. Yes. And remember, we work in a council manager form of government and we work by majority. So and I'm going to give you an example. If Councilmember Tipton were to go to a conference or to go to a planning commission meeting and get up and speak and say, I represent the council, and this is what the council wants to see. Unless a majority of council have given him that position and that direction, he can't do that. That's how we operate here. No unilateral person can come in and say, I want X done right now.
And as a matter of fact, honestly, I probably wouldn't be able to put a planning commission and say it and identify myself as a council. I would identify myself as a resident concerned about a particular item.
Yeah, and it's interesting, because you do wear 2 hats, and I've had council members come off the dais and speak as members of the public. The trick is not to speak about information you've received only as a council member, right? It's you have to truly be speaking as a member of the public. And I did see that happen one time. I don't think it was here. I think it was in another community where a council member came off the dais and spoke from the podium, and she started speaking about things that only the city attorney would have told her as a council member. And so I had to slowly lower my glasses. Like, what are you talking about? Let's stop doing that.
Isn't it presumed? I mean, if a elected official goes and they don't distinguish that they're speaking as a individual,
It is. It is. And I think that goes to like the perception and the time, place, manner that we do it. I think to state I'm speaking in my individual capacity is the best course of action. That's the most conservative approach. And as city attorneys, we take the more conservative approach. I think that's best practice. But yeah, if they get up there and speak, oftentimes I'll say, okay, you're speaking in your individual capacity. I'll just remind them, and then it's clear for the record. Good questions. Okay. Misuse of public funds. When do we have a misuse of public funds? So when not authorized or for a public purpose, and it's when it occurs for personal benefit that's not merely incidental. So we talked about the food purchases and how those can be incidental, or a bottle of water. When I come here to the city and I grab a bottle of water and I drink it, that's incidental, right? I'm not adding up my bottles of water and then reporting $50 worth of water. And a lot of times we do get questions like, is this a misuse of public funds? We get that question a lot, which is good. It means people are thinking about these rules. Yeah, and we want those questions. So personal advantages and perks, the consequences of violating. Civil penalties are $1,000 a day fine plus 3 times the value of the resources used. You could face a 2 to 4 year prison term plus disqualification from office. You could also have income tax implications. And a number of these laws talk about the fact that, well, you may not have to report if they're very specific, nuanced laws. You report it on your taxes. So if you get that gift or that ticket, and these again are very nuanced and need to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, you may have a way not to report it as long as you're reporting it on your taxes. So just keep that in mind. Again, very nuanced laws. You're also going to be paying for hiring a defense lawyer. And if you lose, you're probably going to be paying the other side's legal fees. Case study, Sacramento Suburban Water District. Staff and directors were misusing public resources. There was an investigative report by the Sacramento Bee, and it was use of agency credit card for personal purposes and misreporting of income, double dipping on expense reimbursement. So one way people double dip is they turn in their mileage report and then they turn in their gas receipts. That's double dipping. You should take one or the other. And the legislative response to this was this required training that we're doing, the AB 1234. I have one community that I represent, and I found out just last week that out of 200 employees, about 150 of them have Cal cards. Yeah,
Wow.
that was my reaction right there. Whoa,
Wow.
yeah, like what?
Shouldn't that be like 10?
Maybe not that many. Yeah.
Yes. Advice is good. It's good to, it's good to become aware of these things because then we can help guide the city and, best practices. But there could be some issues there, right? Like how to keep track of what the purchases are for. Like, are we buying lunch for everybody out there? I mean, I hope not, right? I hope we're not buying lunch for developers. And so it's just, we need to be mindful when we have the city credit card. I don't know how many here have Cal cards. The mayor has a Cal card.
I had one before, I don't know.
Yeah.
All the council have,
Yeah,
whether they have it in their possession or not is different.
right.
Like I have, Pro Tem Rodriguez's have never been issued because she hasn't gone to a conference or something.
Yeah.
And then department head.
Yeah. And that's typically what I see are going to be your council members and your
Yeah.
department heads. And then I know the city requires receipts be turned in to support the expenditure. Best practice, let's avoid perks and the temptation to justify them. They're legally risky and they're public relations headache. I know it's tempting sometimes, but just got to say, you know what, no, thank you, or I'll pay for myself, or avoid it. Okay, government.
You want me to take over?
Is this you? Am I already through my 55?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Good job. 1 hour.
Look at that, right on the nose. That's exciting.
Winner.
I know.
What lottery do I win?
Uh,
I like it.
All right, so I am going to take over. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Form 700, which we touched on a little bit already, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. We're going to do a little Brown Act refresher. I know you all just had a pretty extensive Brown Act training, so I'll keep that part brief. Talk a little bit about the Public Records Act, fair processes when you're making decisions, incompatible offices, and then at the end, we're going to do some interactive scenarios where you all get to tell me the answer to the question. So that'll be fun. So the financial interest disclosure is what we typically call the Form 700. And as Mary mentioned, it's something that you have to complete when you assume office, annually while you're in office, and then when you leave office. And you're reporting your financial interests. Just 1 second. Let me fix my notes here. All right, and this all came about with the Political Reform Act. So since 1974, this Form 700 has been required. And it's required by all designated employees. So it's designated employees, but that also includes elected officials, appointed officials, and then certain other actual employees. So like the city manager, the city attorney, the city clerk. So certain specific employees are required to fill out the Form 700 each year. And on that Form 700, you're reporting your sources of income. So that can be your own income from your job. It can be your spouse's income. You're reporting your interests in real property. So be it your primary residence or rental properties, your investments, your business positions, and then these gifts that we've been talking about.
There's different primary residence. I thought the primary residence was something like that.
I think you're right. When I said it, I was like, it's really sources of income. So it's going to be a rental property. So I did want to talk specifically about one reporting obligation because it's something that often gets overlooked, and that's charitable fundraising. And this is not money that you're actually receiving yourself, but this is money that is going to a charity, a government, cause, or a legislative purpose, something that you support. So if you, as an elected or appointed official, request or suggest that somebody donate money to your favorite charity, and that amount exceeds $5,000 in one calendar year, you do have to report that. And I think it goes without saying, but that's a reportable action. But if you request that a charity be supported in return for something, that's where we get into the criminal activity, and it could be charged as extortion. Extortion in California is a misdemeanor, so that would be up to 6 months in jail, a fine of $1,000 or more. But if that charitable donation implicates federal law in any way, those are much worse. And you can spend up to 20 years in prison or a $250,000 fine. So it's just something to keep in mind, because we often don't think that if money is being gifted to our favorite charity, that's a good thing, right? But that's something that needs to be reported, because somebody is kind of doing it for your benefit if you've requested that they do that. And then if you do that in return for a favor or return for a vote, that's going to be illegal. Now we'll talk a little bit about the Brown Act. And like I said, I'll keep it relatively brief because you did already have this training, but it's also a required component of the AB 1234 training. So as you know, the purpose of the Brown Act, it's a sunshine law. So the purpose of the Brown Act is that you're doing all of your city business in public, and that your constituents have an opportunity to comment on that business, unless there's an authorized closed session, which we'll talk about in a little bit. These are the main components of the Brown Act. So you're deliberating and making your decisions in an open public forum, unless you're in closed session. There are meeting agendas and packets that are published in advance. And if the city has a website, which most cities these days have a website, the agenda needs to be posted on the website as well. A meeting is specifically defined. So it's any congregation of a majority of the members of the decision-making body to discuss, hear, deliberate, or make a decision on any item within the agency's jurisdiction. So in other words, 3 council members or more, or 3 planning commissioners or more can't get together and discuss. Can't get together and discuss anything within your jurisdiction unless you're in a publicly agendized meeting.
I got a question.
Sure.
When we went to visit the county place, right? There were 3 of us.
Mm-hmm.
It was Robert, Jose, and myself. Now, we didn't set that up. That was set up for us. Now, were we in violation of Brown Act?
Paul told me about that, and it should have been agendized.
I'm sorry?
It should have been agendized. So there should have been a public notice that was a meeting. That was a meeting, in my opinion, based on what I was told and what I know. So when 3 planning commissioners went to visit the facility and received information and discussed that particular cannabis operation, I don't know exactly what the content of your discussions were, but if you remember, it's to hear, discuss, deliberate, or decide. So if you're hearing, discussing a topic within your jurisdiction.
I don't know exactly what Paul told me. To me, it really doesn't matter, because I know what we did. And what we didn't do is discuss anything amongst ourselves. I think we barely even spoke to each other while we were there. Yes, I have an affinity for asking lots of questions, and I asked them about their operation. I actually corrected a couple of things that they did improperly, and that was to help them. One of them was they had the exit sign and it was covered up. And when I was employed, I was part of the safety committee that I was on for years, and I know that's a no-no. OSHA would come in, they were cited for them. Then there was another one where they had for the washout facility, washout drives, and it was all blocked up with a bunch of stuff. And I corrected it. I said, dude, you get caught for that if you're going to get cited. But other than that, did we discuss anything much about the plant itself, Robert? No, we didn't. No. We asked questions, So how could Paul come directly at me and say, you're in direct violation of the Brown Act? I said, dude, we didn't speak about anything, we were just there. Well, you're a perfect example of what the Brown Act is and blah, blah, blah. You know what?
Yeah, and well, probably best practice is to post the agenda
Yeah, but
because
the
you
thing-
don't know the information that you're going to be hearing, whether that's going to affect a planning commission decision down the road. Maybe whether or not, I don't know what levels come to your planning commission, but let's say permits are going to be renewed and issued. And in the back of your head, you remember they cover up exit signs. They aren't safe with their employees. I don't want them here in the city. They put our residents at risk. So best practice would have been to notice that as just post the agenda. This is where we're going to be, 3 of us.
Okay, well, if that's the case, then that should have been the city to post that, not us.
You're right. You're right. And that's where the discussion with the city attorney's office came in. Absolutely right. Yeah, that would be something the city would handle. And so going forward, we
Yeah,
know.
because I mean, I'll be perfectly honest. I mean, when Paul called and told me about that, I got really pissed.
Yeah, because you want to
And I
do things the right
pointed
way.
out to him that it wasn't us who set it up.
Yeah.
It was the city who set it up, where we are.
Yeah.
And doesn't seem to know anything about it.
Because Anne would have posted it.
Yeah.
But yeah, best practices. And that's the good thing about working in collaboration with your city manager and everyone doing this training is now you can say, hey, I think this should be posted. Because we're all human, right? We're all human. We all make mistakes. Yeah, we don't want to place blame. We want to correct the problem moving forward. And so, yeah, when 3 of you go to a site visit, we want to post that as an agendized item. Now, if 3 of you were to go to a conference like Cal Cities, we don't post anything there. We just remind people about perception, public perception. So when we see 3 or more together and a public member sees that, what are they thinking?
Discussing city business. Yeah.
Yeah, they probably, and they know your role with the city. They're probably thinking you guys are talking about city business or planning commission business. So it's more of a perception thing. So we encourage,
Yeah.
and in a smaller community, you guys are going to be at events together.
Perception isn't always reality.
100%. 100%. I just, our office always takes the more conservative approach because we want you to avoid situations where
Right,
you're
you're not
defending
there on
yourself
the
on
front.
social media.
Right.
Mhm.
This
Yeah.
that actually brings up an interesting point though, because the planning commission doesn't have final say over it, there has to be cannabis and all goes to the city council. Yeah, all of it, anything that has to do with the cannabis locations has to go to the city council for final.
But they make recommendations to the city council.
Yeah.
Yes.
No,
Yeah,
mean,
I think the
we
better practice would be posted.
We don't, in the planning commission, we don't have final say on anything. I think all we can do is make suggestions. And it's up to city council. No,
No, because the CUPs have to be approved by the council. You basically approve design reviews, you approve building plans.
like,
building-
it goes to you
So there
guys.
are
Not everything.
No,
Not everything.
no, unless it's appealed to us, it doesn't come to us.
Right.
With the exception of cannabis.
So you do have some decision-making authority.
We're
is
the
it?
final on any kind of appeal, but that's.
Right.
Yeah, good
I
question.
think next time, 3 of us were there, maybe I'll just say I don't want to be there, and 2 of you. can do it.
Yeah,
I've done that
That would be
before.
another way to do it now.
definitely another way to handle
Yeah,
it.
you could do separate tours, 2, 2,
Well, I
1.
understand that, but like
Yeah.
I said, I mean, that. No, just leave it alone.
Well, and when you want to be compliant with the Brown Act and you want that assistance from the city or the city attorney's office, that's important. I mean, and so you raise a valid concern. And I think it's good that you brought it to the attention and we're talking about it. Because now as a team, okay, this is what we need to watch out for because we all do need to work together. So
Indeed.
I'm glad you brought it
In
up.
that case, I would say somebody on this is actually on the cannabis provider, because they should know that rule as well.
Well, the cannabis providers.
They're not the ones going to get in trouble.
And so I took the
Yeah,
they were like, we wasted Florida.
yeah, let's do it again. Yeah, that's one way. Yeah, you know. You guys know the practice and you know what constitutes a meeting and so, yeah.
So we talked about conferences not being a meeting or maybe some social gatherings, other things to keep in mind that are not meetings for under the Brown Act or things like ceremonial events. So I'm thinking about Chief Mixer's swearing in, so all of council could have attended that event and it would not be a violation of the Brown Act. So there's certain things that just because you're all in one place at the same time, you want to make sure that you don't discuss city business. And as Mary mentioned, it's best not to sit together or congregate because then people will assume that's what you're doing. But you can still all attend.
It would be like Thanksgiving one on like Christmas.
Yeah. So just
Or groundbreaking for this, you know, groundbreaking for a building and you're all there with your shovels and your hard hats.
But like the luncheon, if you're wanting to avoid perception, you don't sit all at the same table. So,
Yeah, spread out.
And then sometimes meetings can accidentally happen. And that happens.
Quotes.
Yeah, accidentally, but truly accidentally. And that can happen in the form of a serial meeting. So you want to avoid creating a serial meeting, which is a series of communications that end up having all of or a majority of the decision makers actually conferring on an issue without actually being in the same room. This slide shows the Attorney General's definition of a serial meeting, and it's most often a type of meeting conducted through a series of communications by individual board members or less than a quorum groups, ultimately involving a majority of the body's members. And this, of course, is prohibited because all of your business is meant to be conducted in public, where the public has an opportunity to comment.
Well, in newly electeds and newly appointed, you are subject to the Brown Act before you're sworn in. And so I think that it's just natural tendencies when you're elected or first appointed, like, I'm going to find out everything there is so I can be a good council member, a good commissioner, and I'm going to come in with all this knowledge. And you start talking to your colleagues, that's going to be a serial meeting. So you need to be really careful. You are subject to the Brown Act upon election, not necessarily when you're, you know, that gap between you're elected and before you're sworn in, you're subject to it.
That's good. That's
Like when the vote is certified, correct? After the vote is certified, correct?
Correct. Yeah. And the clerk has 30 days to certify the vote. Presidential elections, it may take the full 30 days.
They take full 30 days.
on purpose. And then serial meetings can happen through technology. So you'll notice when I send an email to all of council, I put you all in the BCC line. And the purpose of that is that if someone does reply all, it doesn't actually go to all of the recipients. So that's just to avoid that risk of a serial meeting, but something to keep in mind. If one council member emails something to another council member and that council member forwards it to someone else, and in that string of emails, you're communicating how you might vote on an issue or conferring in some way, that would be a violation of the Brown Act.
So I just got an email, we're voting on the things for Halloween, I would say Councilmember Rodriguez. And then I, if I was running 5 years, so I just replied and then when we didn't get it, came back and heard again, like, why am I getting?
So are you two on the committee
So
to
the first-
judge?
Yeah, we all got it to vote. So the first time for the House one, I didn't reply.
Fine.
But a couple of other people did. So then I thought, well, we should know who each other voted for so that, you know, we're not double voting on the same participant. So then on the next one, the Calavera contest, that one I replied along so everybody could see what I. But I.
But it was just the two of you, right?
Just two, or was?
No, all five.
All five of us.
All five of you.
But I thought that was something in the last training about like there's certain like certain exceptions, like if you can reply all to confirm like your availability, things like that, and that's what I thought this would fall under. Like it's city business that we're being asked a question to all of us answer.
That's tricky because the first one that you mentioned, your availability, that I wouldn't say is necessarily city business. You're just trying to figure out when you can actually meet to discuss city business. And then a Halloween decorating contest. I mean, it's technically city business. I don't know that it's like your most important business, but it's probably the funnest business.
So we should never file.
It's better not to.
Better practice.
And maybe in the future that could be done more like with some sort of a polling tool, like a doodle type thing, as opposed to email, but I'm not sure where that.
Or maybe the results go to one person.
Yeah,
And that person can tally and.
yeah.
So I got a question now. If him and I were out and we met up with each other, we were talking, we can't discuss what we talked about on the planning commission or anything like that, right?
Two of you can, just two, because that's less than a quorum. It does get a little tricky though, because if the two of you confer and one of you then discusses that conversation with one other council member, then you have a serial meeting or one other planning commissioner. So I mean, best practice probably not to, but two of you can discuss. And we'll talk in a little bit about making unbiased, fair decisions. And part of that comes with receiving all of your information during the public hearing. And so when you're conferring outside of the public hearing, you may be receiving information that might create a biased outcome, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then we typically talk about two types of serial meetings, the chain meeting and then the hub and spoke. The chain is what we've talked about a little bit already. It might be two council members conferring on an issue and then one of them conferring with a third council member, and then at that and also relaying what they learned from the first one. And so you have this chain of discussion that ultimately ends up in more than three or more of you knowing how the others will vote or what your thoughts are on an issue. The hub and spoke, typically, I would say the hub could often be a staff member, or a staff member like the city manager is discussing the same issue with different council members, which is totally fine, unless they're then relaying back what they've heard from the other council members to the other council members. So they're certainly able to relay information outward, which I know Paul meets with each of the council members every week and talks with them about answers questions and what's going on in the city and all of these things. But as long as he's not then telling Councilmember Ortiz what Mayor White told him, how he's going to vote on this particular issue, that's where we get into trouble.
Well, another example of that is if you, as a planning commissioner, let's say you have something cannabis related and you're thinking, gosh, I really am not in favor of cannabis. And you ask this planning commissioner, how do you feel about cannabis? He says, I don't like it. And then next day you go to this planning commissioner and you say, well, how do you feel about cannabis? I don't like it. What does that tell you?
That I'm violating the Brown Act.
Yeah, but you've also gained information about how they're likely to vote, and they're going to vote in line with you. And then you realize, I got a majority. We can reject this item.
Right.
And so that's going to be a Brown Act violation.
Hey, okay, so I'm gonna pose a real dumb question.
No
I
such
watched
thing.
it, I asked too many dumb questions. Let's go to the premise that along the lines that you said, I talked to someone and someone else talked to someone. Okay, so I talked to Robert. And we discussed whatever. And then I tell my wife, I was talking with Commissioner Ortiz about cannabis. And this is the way he feels about it. So then my wife talks a lot. She's gonna watch me. My wife talks a lot, goes and talks to Jose and tells him what I told her what Robert said. How does that end up?
Yeah, that would be a Brown Act violation.
Because you have an intermediary doing it. It's like no different than Paul Wood talking to each of you and sharing what your information is.
Even though she's not part of it.
Yeah. And she probably doesn't know better.
She's acting.
but-
in-
For you.
So the bottom line is discuss all of your issues in public at a meeting. If you want to discuss something, put it on the agenda.
And that really is the purpose of the law, right? I mean, transparency. The public wants to hear the discussion at an agendized meeting. They want to be part of it. And they also want to know when they see the agenda, like, oh, I might be interested in that. I'm going to come to the meeting so I can make a comment. And that's why we don't want the private conversations going on.
So we do want to always allow opportunity for public comment at your council and planning commission meetings. At regular meetings, you'll need to open up public comment for any item within your board's jurisdiction. Doesn't have to be just what's on that night's agenda. At a special meeting like tonight, you only have to allow public comment on whatever particular items are on the agenda that night. You do have to allow recording at your meeting. So if you see someone out in the audience, like recording from their cell phone, there's no way to prohibit that. And then let's talk about disruptions. So you'll hear us say that a city council meeting or a planning commission meeting is your meeting. It's a meeting to conduct city business. It's not a public meeting. It's a meeting in public, right? And so you welcome the public to observe and to comment on your business. But those comments can't rise to the level of an actual disruption where it's keeping you from conducting your business. And so there are ways to handle these disruptions, although it is challenging and there's a very fine balance because people also have their First Amendment rights, which are very widespread, broad rights. So people can say virtually anything they'd like, but really they have to say it at the right time and in the right place. So for example, at the city council meetings, public comment must come from the dais. Public commenters are limited to 3 minutes, and that's a city number. So that's not from state law. So 3 minutes here in Greenfield it's typically 3 minutes in most cities, but could be 4 minutes, 6 minutes, whatever you might want. But when disruptions occur, so for example, if there were audience members shouting, and so, mayor's banging the gavel and the council's not able to discuss whatever issue is on the table, one recommended approach is to just take a break. So, you stop the meeting, council may go back to the conference room, gives everyone a chance to calm down. If that doesn't work, then another recommended approach is to clear the room. You do have to allow the media to stay unless they are part of the disruption. So if they're out there, yelling and shouting and doing whatever is disrupting, then you can force them to leave. But in general, you do have to let the media stay. And so it's this important distinction we make between actually disrupting the meeting or not allowing you to do your business and people just saying things that you don't like to hear, which that happens. I won't say every single meeting, but but very often, there's public comment that is either uncomfortable or rude or distasteful or all sorts of things that you do have to allow them to speak as long as they're doing it from the right place, the right amount of time during the right part of the meeting. And then you can move on into your business.
Can I stop you there?
Yeah.
So, there's been times that at meetings where the speaker's been stopped. Because, what they're saying doesn't pertain to the jurisdiction of the city, not
Yes.
that applied to public comments on items not on the agenda.
Yeah. So even those do have to be within your subject matter jurisdiction. So if someone's talking about, gosh, I don't know, like the Monterey Bay Aquarium, I just saw that painting, so it made me think of that, but, or something that's like totally, and you have a very broad jurisdiction. So there's a lot of things that could be considered within your jurisdiction, but if it's just off the wall, like talking about space aliens or something like that, they can be stopped and you don't have to allow that public comment. And the same is true for when you get to those public comment on the particular agenda item. So at city council, and I think planning commission, you have your public comment on all items at the beginning of the meeting. And then for each individual item, you have public comment. And at those times, that public comment period is for that item only. And so you could, and the mayor's done this, say, hey, that's not relevant to this item, or we're going to talk about that at item J1 or, whatever that is.
And then, on the clearing of the room, is that solely the mayor's call, because sometimes there's a divided council. And maybe, a few people are enjoying the chaos. And 3
I mean, that happens, but
Please call this that, ultimately.
I mean, it's the mayor's meeting to run, and so it is the mayor's call.
So he doesn't need it.
No.
I'm calling point of order.
Anyone can do that.
Yeah.
Anyone on the council.
We can call, I thought I had read in the paper that we could not
Yeah.
call it on the meeting.
Point of order is amongst yourselves.
Call it on the public, we were supposed to use it on each other.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah. Point of order is you would say point of order to one of your colleagues that's saying something, and then
But not to the public.
no.
Because that happens a lot. Example, and all of that.
I mean,
The chaos.
you could use the phrase, the mayor could use the phrase point of order when he wants to communicate to the public that they should settle down or whatever the issue is. But really, I mean, technically with Rosenberg's rules, that point of order is between yourselves.
Well, to the mayor. If we're calling point of order, you don't like something that's in the family. The mayor needs to step in and tell me. What about me?
You hold each other accountable is what you do. Yeah. And I mean, you've watched the videos and you've been to Soledad. You know some of the chaos that can ensue. Yeah. And so you guys can call point of order among each other. If it, if we're getting the crowd to chant,
Yeah.
as a council member, inappropriate things or just chanting in general, you as a council member or mayor can say, hey, point of order, this isn't okay. And then also in our Brown Act handbook that we give to every commissioner and council member, there is an appendix that gives you guidelines for dealing with disruptions. And there's actually a script in here. So for the chair, vice chair, mayor, vice mayor, there's a script that you can follow because it gets, again, what Jennifer said, you're dealing with First Amendment rights. And so it gets really tricky the minute you try to clear a room or have a person removed. And if you're going to remove a person, you better have your police chief on board with that or whoever your sergeant of arms is, because oftentimes your police chief isn't going to go over there and manhandle people and force them to leave, if they're just shouting. So it really is a fine line. And you need to be consistent. So
Specific language in there. right?
yes, there is specific language. So I'll give an example. If someone stands up and shouts from the public, but they happen to vote for you and you do nothing about that, and then someone else stands up from the public and shouts and you're like, first warning, second warning, you're out. You have to deliver it consistently or you're going to see a challenge. And so it's an art to doing it.
What about Zoom meetings now? I heard on the news tonight that they're in Seaside that they're banning Zoom meetings in their city council because of racial epithets and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So is that allowed?
So they're cutting off public comment is what they're doing. So yes, it is. During COVID, different rules applied, but now having it available online for people to comment is a courtesy. Yeah, it's not required. So even if we had technical difficulties tonight during this meeting for people watching online, we wouldn't have to stop the meeting. We could keep going. If we were under COVID rules, we'd have to stop until we got the system back up, and then we could continue with decision making.
It's a little different if a council member is attending remotely, then we have to allow public comment. But if everyone's in person, then you don't.
And we are seeing that, and those same individuals that are doing it over Zoom, some of them are actually appearing in person now. And so we're advising on how to handle those situations. Again, remind them of decorum needs to be within the purview of the public agency's business. And so can't attack the speech.
I have a question. So what if I'm in the public and I'm sitting up there in the back and someone's being disruptive and no one will be there notice it because it's a full, meeting? What, can we do anything or how does that work? Like if I can't hear the meeting because of all the, puffing and puffing and all this stuff, what happens there?
I mean, you as an individual person can ask them to stop, but really if they can't hear it, then they're not being disrupted. and it's their meeting, so they don't really have to conduct, they don't have to make sure that everyone here can hear, if that makes sense, because they're needing to conduct their business. And like I said, if they can't hear it, it's probably not actually disrupting the meeting. It might
Well,
be disrupting you.
Yeah, and one way to do it is during public comment, come up and say something.
Yeah.
Or on that agenda item, come up and say, hey, council, can you repeat that? I couldn't hear because people in the back are being very disruptive to me. And it could be that they're constantly kicking your chair, right? And you can always get up and move as well. Another disruption is if there's signs, big signs. And we've had this recently in some of our communities, and they sit in the front row and they hold their signs up. Can't do that. You can have signs, but you got to go to the back because we can't block anybody's view. So if that's happening, your council knows, and you as a planning commission can be like, please move to the side, move to the back so that everybody can see and hear.
And actually, Mary alluded to this, and I didn't discuss it specifically, but before you clear the room, it is best practice to give warnings, or before you remove an individual person. So you'd be like, okay, you're disrupting the meeting, and there's the language in the book, but this is your first warning. And then, you want to give the warnings to give people an opportunity to correct what they're doing before you just clear the room.
Okay, so you have Arnold Ladders back here, just called in the scene. And you're gonna have them removed. Okay, but you don't have any 5-0 available immediately. So then what do? You stop the meeting?
So you don't have any what available? Oh.
Anyone who's
Yeah.
going to remove
Oh.
that.
Okay.
Sorry? What was the answer to that?
Oh, no, we were just clarifying.
We were clarifying your question. So what you can do is you can stop the meeting.
Okay.
And that actually happened, I believe, in Sacramento recently, where it was so chaotic and so disruptive. They had to stop the meeting. They had to help council get out of the building because it actually became a dangerous situation. And then council rescheduled the meeting for an inconvenient time, so that they didn't have that chaos.
Well, when they did that, let's see, I think I'm quoting you on my paraphrasing. You said they scheduled it at an inconvenience time.
Mhm.
They still have to post it, don't they?
Yeah, they do. But if you're having your meeting at 8 a.m. when everyone needs to be at work, you're less likely to
Yeah,
have those
well,
people
yeah,
that come
understand.
after work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they did, or maybe they had it at 2 a.m. I don't know. But you can always we can't finish our business tonight, and you adjourn the meeting. If you take enough breaks, if it's disruption after disruption, and you say, okay, we're going to take another break. Okay, we're going to take another break, and you're here till 4 a.m, probably going to be able to get through your business by then, because they probably will eventually stop. Like, oh, we better knock it off. I mean, it's kind of a pain, but those are your options.
Better not.
Bring a lot of coffee.
You better knock it off. Or what?
What's that?
It's funny. Talking a little kid, you better knock it off.
I didn't know you guys had a panic button out there.
The
Oh, good.
little button. No.
Because then.
This is a test of the.
No, it says. Oh, it says manage or something like that.
Oh my God. All right, well, let's talk about closed session. So we've talked all about all of the reasons that meetings need to be open and in public, but as you know, there are certain reasons that you can meet in closed session and discuss certain things without the public being present. Typically, those are things like conferring with legal counsel regarding pending litigation or anticipated litigation, sometimes personnel issues, property negotiations. You can talk about the price and terms of, a particular piece of property that the city wants to buy or sell. So there are certain reasons that you can meet in closed session. Those conversations are confidential. Typically, there are no minutes during a closed session. The confidential piece, though, is only the information that you're discussing related to the closed session. So if you walk in and you're, talking about what type of cheese or grapes you're going to put on your plate, or what you did over the weekend, or anything like that, that's not confidential just because you're in the room. It's really the purpose that you're in the closed session. That conversation is what's confidential.
Right, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But So when you come out of closed session and report out, I noticed that, what about when the mic is covered by someone to confer with you on the side? That's not in public. What's the
I mean, typically what the mayor is asking is if there's anything to report from closed session.
Right.
So it's, I
I've done
mean,
that as well. When I was running the last public hearing was over the conference, I think I asked you on the side,
Yeah.
can I say that?
yeah, and they
It's
can talk to me.
When I did it, it was checking that I would say that.
Yeah, I guess maybe I'm not sure what you're asking.
And it's just, and that is the meeting, and it was a couple of times. That the mic is covered and she's leaning over asking you stuff. But I think you actually said it out loud.
I try to respond into the microphone when a council member or the mayor asks a question. But we do have, I mean, sometimes they ask for assistance just with like procedural issues. So are you saying you think those should be public?
It didn't look right.
I see.
It didn't look right.
Perception.
Yeah.
It was like, I know which one you're talking about, because then you did say what it was, because I was first checking. Like, so you can report out what we just said, and then I said that, and then you did report out.
And it's not that, but I mean, sometimes two council members are whispering together when meeting.
Yeah, and they may be talking about their weekend or something, but you're right, it's perception.
So, one time it's happened, but. Somebody took their phone and the wrong phone when we were starting the closed session. Nobody said anything. Nobody said.
Yeah,
anything.
so you guys hold each other accountable.
And I was just like, wait a minute, I don't even want to say anything.
Yeah.
Because.
Don't know if you're being recorded or. Yeah, you want to hold each other accountable. And I don't know in your council code of conduct if you have anything related to use of cell phones while you're at the dais. Some cities do, some cities allow it.
I haven't seen anything in there.
Yeah, I mean, we're confident in another city that one council person is getting advice from people in the public, like during the meeting or questions to ask or, but if
Things because the rubbish from talk,
Mhm.
so I can read when some people, talk, I can't hear.
yeah,
Even with the hearing, I can't hear.
yeah,
So I can read it there, and without having to.
Yeah.
On the rubbish sheet of their top, the top there.
Mhm.
Yeah, with the time, so I
Yeah.
can keep subtitles on here. But normally now I see everybody, we don't take our phones in there, we just probably.
I do, I wanna say I do take my phone in there, but I've never been on it.
Yeah.
Like, I just take it with me, and it's usually sitting on the desk or upside down, yeah, it's just that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I do.
You take it wherever you go. But
Yeah.
I really am
kids. Yeah, and you guys could hold each other accountable. You could even consider a cell phone policy if that's something council wanted to consider. So,
I thought there was one.
I haven't seen it in there.
So, yeah.
Well, and then in the past, one of the first things they'd say is, make sure your cell phones are off.
oh, so they don't disrupt the meeting. Mhm. Make sure their ringers off. But people can still use their phones to record what's going on. We're not telling members of the public not to use their phones. It's silence them.
So
So
it's
we
not
can focus
disruptive to the meeting.
Mhm.
Even then, some people live as well.
Yeah. So violation of the Brown Act can be a crime, or it can subject board members or council members, planning commissioners to civil penalties. Some consequences of a violation of the Brown Act are that some decisions that are not made in accordance with the open meeting laws are voidable. After asking the agency to cure the violation, either the district attorney or an interested person can sue the city. There's also criminal sanctions available. And then there's other consequences. So for example, if there is an allegation or a Brown Act violation that relates to closed session, the court could order the city to record its closed sessions just to ensure that it complies with the law in the future. Another consequence, another consequence that we've talked a little bit about already is that you could have adverse media coverage. This is another case. This is from 2006, and this is about the city of Hanford. The DA there asked Kings County Superior Court to rule that the city council had conducted an unauthorized closed session meeting and asked that the court order the city to record its future closed sessions. We're going to move on to the Public Records Act. This is one we haven't covered before, so a little bit, hopefully newer information. But similar to your public meetings, the public has a right to view certain or most city documents that relate to city business. And this happens all of the time. Anne can attest to this because they come right to her. But basically, pursuant to the PRA, the Public Records Act, the public has a right to access materials that are created within the course of conducting the people's business. And these materials can be any writing that's prepared, owned, used, or retained by the public agency. There are some exceptions, which we won't get into, but in general, most documents you should just presume are public. And these will include your emails, and those can be your emails on your city email, or if you use your personal email for city business, those emails are also subject to the Public Records Act. A person who wants to view public records of the city can make that request in any way they like. So they can call up the city and ask for records. They can send an email. They can come and drop off a letter that requests those records. And then once those records are ready for them to review, they can either come into City Hall or wherever the records are located and view them in person, or they can receive copies electronically or by paper. Typically in this day and age, people just get an email with the records attached. The city has 10 days from when they receive the request for public records to respond to the requester, and they don't have to provide the records within 10 days. They just have to respond as to whether or not the city thinks they have records. Because a lot of times there's either voluminous records that the city is going to have to gather, or they're records that need to be analyzed to see whether or not there is some information in there that needs to be redacted because it's exempt. So it may take longer than 10 days to actually provide the records. But that initial response typically tells the requester whether or not there's records and gives an estimate as to when they think they'll be provided.
And that's been business days or 10 calendar?
It's 10 calendar days. And as I mentioned, there are exemptions, and typically these are things like attorney-client privilege. There's certain personal information that might be exempt. But we really just presume that any writing made by the city in its business is a public record that anyone can request. And the courts are typically look at this very broadly in that they're going to defer to the right of transparency. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're typing that email or.
This is a good time to bring up personal devices too. Make sure you're not using your city email on a personal device.
Yeah.
They can pull anything off of the personal device too.
Well, anything related to city business.
But that just means that they can search, they subpoena, they can search through your phone for anything that the city wants to say.
Yeah, we need a subpoena. Typically what we do is give an affidavit to the commissioner or council member that says, this is the request, search of personal devices. Under penalty of perjury, attest to the following. You have records, you don't have records, here they are. Because if the city's challenged on that, what we want to be able to show is that the city is protected. We have a statement under penalty of perjury from this commissioner, this council member saying they searched their personal device. So if you end up having something on your personal device that you didn't disclose that was city business, you're going to be the one in trouble. So our job is to protect the city. That's why we give that affidavit. We can't just take your personal device.
But it is best practice to just use a city device or city email for city business.
So if you go to closed session under the Freedom of Information Act, can they go after that and go with discussion in the closed session?
So the Brown Act protects the confidentiality of what's in closed session, and the CPRA, the Public Records Act, is only related to writings or documents. So nothing that you say verbally is subject to the Public Records Act.
And then if we as attorneys have documents for the council or the planning commission in closed session and we hand those out, we typically take them back. And that's attorney-client privileged. So that won't be discoverable. What we want to do eventually is marry what happens in closed session with open session. So if, let's say we are in there under real property negotiations and we're talking about price and terms in closed session, well, we're not going to report out, hey, offer them $500,000 for the property. What we will ultimately report out is when we have a final sale agreement and it's on the agenda. That's the report out. And so at some point, open and closed will be married. So maybe litigation finishes with the settlement agreement. At some point, that becomes public. It becomes a public record. It maybe will be something agendized. So oftentimes we'll say, oh, nothing to report. It's not because we're trying to keep everything secret. It's because at that time, the Brown Act allows it. But at some point, the information, when we have a final decision on something, will be made public.
Okay, so in a small capsule, what's the difference between a PRA and the FIA?
The FIA is the federal law and the PRA is the California law. And
So, I mean, so what I'm asking is, can the FIA, being that it's federal law, can they use that to try to get full 700 votes?
well, I don't know the FIA, but I do think that it's also related to just documents. It's related to just documents, so nothing's said.
And I think too, if we were to be challenged, let's say, and end up in court and they subpoena council members to testify what's in closed session, we would defend that. We'd say absolutely not.
Okay.
And we would defend it to the bitter end.
So now I'm gonna ask the before all the questions. If you've already been mandated to record your closed sessions, you don't want to think, is that discoverable under the PRA?
I think my best guess here would be that it would be under a court's protective order and the court would listen to what was said. It's for the court purposes, right? To hold the city accountable.
Okay.
I think we would be able to assert an exemption there.
Okay.
Because we start with the premise that everything's public and then we work backwards from there with the exemptions.
Right.
And one exemption is, well, it's in draft form. We don't have to produce drafts. So if it's a draft, mark draft on it. Things dealing with the tribal law. So if you have a situation, some communities have multiple bones and burial items that are dug up during the development process. All of that is confidential and will never be disclosed in a PRA. And that's under federal law. That's under federal tribal law. So there are times when we have a crossover, but we do start with that basic premise. It's all public. And then we work backwards from there.
So we're going to talk a little bit about a fair process. And I alluded to this a little bit earlier, and we're switching topics here. When council members or planning commissioners sit on the dais and they make what we call quasi-judicial decisions, and these are decisions that impact an individual or group, where you're applying specific requirements. So maybe it's the ordinance, the city zoning ordinance, to a specific situation. Maybe it's someone's variance or use permit or license. So when you're making those types of decisions, we call that a quasi-judicial decision. And when you're making those decisions, you're expected to be fair and impartial because those people who are subject to those decisions and also anyone impacted by those decisions, maybe not just the applicant, are entitled to due process, which is an opportunity to be heard and notice that it's going to occur. So those types of decisions will, there's a public notice in the newspaper, certain property owners may receive a mailed notice, and then everyone has an opportunity to come speak about that item at the meeting. And so, we talk about being fair and impartial in a few different ways, but one of them is when it comes to just information. So the idea is that you make your decision based on the information that you receive in the public hearing. So, you can become biased if you're out gathering your own information about, how am I going to vote? Or if you're discussing the issue before the public hearing, sometimes that can create a bias in your mind, or even the perception, if someone knows that you're doing that, when you come up to the dais to make a decision, that you already have a decision in mind, before you have the public hearing and hear from all of the public commenters, all the information from the staff report. So it's just something to keep in mind that when you're sitting up there and you're making these types of decisions, you're meant to be impartial and base your decision based on what you're hearing at that public hearing.
So I've been guilty of doing research on particular items just for informational and questions at the meeting. Is that making me biased?
I mean, I think only if you're biased. So I think this is kind of something for you to keep in mind and consider when you're doing that. That you're not seeking information maybe only from one side of the argument, or seeking information that will support your already preconceived idea. It's kind of a self-reflection, if you will. Because I don't think, and then also the perception issue. So, even though you may not actually be biased, there may be a perception that you are when you're making that decision.
Well, there's a lot of times things come before it that I don't deal with in my everyday life.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Part of the learning process.
Yeah.
I do think though, like if you go out and you meet with a developer and they're giving you information related to the hearing, that one, you don't say, okay, well, I'll vote in favor or I'll vote against your project. We don't want to do that before the public hearing, but when you're up at the dais, share that information with the rest of your colleagues. So everybody has the same information before a vote is taken. So I don't think it's necessarily so much, I do think that you do need to be aware of the bias, but any information you have that your colleagues don't, be certain to share that.
I agree.
Yeah. So, and I think that that's how you avoid it too. Like, here's all the information that, I had that maybe you don't
Yeah,
have.
especially with planning, for going out and looking at the property, it brings a whole new,
Mhm.
a whole new idea of what's going on, as opposed to the sitting here looking at the maps.
100%.
And then, there are the other types of biases that we know more about or hear more about, which, if you have a particular bias against ethnic group, religious group, these are things that if you have, and also if it's a personal bias. So we talked about the financial biases, but personal bias that, like if you have a particular loyalty, for example, or a particular distaste for something, maybe it's an alcohol business or cannabis business or something that really comes from more of a personal than a financial place, you do still want to think about recusing yourself from those decisions. And these can be decisions where you're either strongly opposed or even strongly in support of, because these can be things that will lead to that person or that individual or anyone impacted by the decision not having that fair opportunity to be heard and considered.
So one example that I had in a community was a council member was elected and he's strongly against cannabis coming into his community, strong because of his personal beliefs and because he's also in law enforcement. Didn't want anything to do with it, but recognized that the city needed the funds coming in, or the city was going to be in financial dire straits. Like this was one of their last resorts. And so he ended up voting in favor of it, but not before a lot of self-reflection. Like, why am I against this? Like, am I voting in favor of this or voting against it because it's, good for the community, bad for the community, and not necessarily because it's something personally that I hate and would never use. And so that he really wrestled with that, but understood where it was coming from.
All right. And then we'll talk just briefly about incompatible offices. So there are times, there aren't times really when you should hold two incompatible offices. And so this will happen when you hold simultaneous offices that are either appointed or elected, but when those two offices in some way conflict with one another. So for example, if one office that you held had the ability to audit or overrule or remove members or dismiss employees of the other office, those would be considered incompatible. Or if there's any possibility that there would be any kind of clash of duties or loyalties between the offices, you couldn't hold the two different offices. And so we've seen this in recent cases with like a school district in a city, or, that may not at first glance seem to be in conflict, but could potentially be in conflict. You really shouldn't hold or are not allowed to hold both offices.
Planning commission, city council.
Yeah, exactly. So what happens if that occurs is that by accepting the second office, you are automatically relinquishing the first office. So it's just something to keep in mind. I don't think that that's necessarily an issue, but just something to know. I think we're going to finish. We're not going to get to our scenarios, but that's okay. Going to finish with 10 rules of public service. And these are based on the law that we've talked about, but they come from more of a place of common sense or just kind of best practices. So you want to approach your job as a service to the public. I think that each and every one of you took your appointment or ran for office because you had a desire to serve the community of Greenfield. And so just keep that in mind as you continue serving the community. You want to promise only good, fair, and honest service. Pay for your own lunch. Buy your own tickets. You can accept gifts from friends and family, but return gifts from others. Ask the city to pay for your business travel expenses as opposed to someone else. You want to do your personal business outside of the city workspace or, your election business or whatever that looks like. You want to be open and transparent, be honest and fair in all of your dealings, and then always do the right thing even when no one is watching. Easy. It sounds easy.
And your scenarios, they have the scenario, and then on the next page, it has
they're in your
the answer. So if you want to quiz yourself, but there's some fun scenarios, and
Some of them are a little tricky.
yeah, some of them based off of actual fact patterns. So
Are there any final questions, comments?
Would it be unethical for somebody who's in the city administration, in one capacity or another, to run for city council?
Well, I should have mentioned that. That's, not allowed.
for a certain amount of time, like they'd have to leave the city. So like Paul couldn't run for city council and still serve as your city manager.
Well, he couldn't run for city council, but he's only there anyway.
Well, if he did.
If he did, and I think he does have a house in Lipscomb. It just, the definition of, okay, yeah. So it's primary residence, and there's a whole separate definition of primary residence. Yeah.
But that's actually written into our bylaw, into our rules as well, as you can't be a city employee and be a city council.
You also need to be careful too. So I'll use cannabis again as an example. When a cannabis developer comes in and council approves a development, a council member can't leave council and work for the cannabis developer for 1 year. There's a time limit on it. Yeah, good questions. Yeah. If you guys have more questions, feel free to reach out, and this group's always a pleasure. Yeah. Not the most exciting topic, so
No,
we appreciate you guys hanging in there.
required.
Anybody else?
2 years, right?
It is.
Yeah.
You don't have to do it again for 2 years. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Yeah. I think you're going to want to
Adjourn
I will.
whenever you're ready.